Welcome to Quit to Win, the show where we explore the moments people had to let go of destructive patterns, limiting identity, and the internal battle in order to rebuild their life with purpose and clarity. Our today's guest is Dr. Sheldon Greaves, an author of the Guerrilla Scholar Handbook, PhD graduates of UC Berkeley, co-founders of the private university, rocket science collaborator, podcast producer, and science educator, and one of the most creative, unconventional minds you will meet. But what makes his stories remarkable is what he walked away from. Sheldon earned one of the most prestigious academic credentials in the world and then choose not to use it the way the system expected. With few jobs in his field and little interest in the traditional academic life, he quits the prescribed path and build something far more interesting in its place. Today, he make the case that serious intellectual work doesn't require an institution. It requires curiosity, community, and the courage to learn on your own terms. It's really a pleasure and honor having you on the show, Dr. Sheldon.
Thank you, Benaiah. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so Dr. Sheldon, you earned a PhD from Berkeley and walk away from traditional academic career. What did you have to quit believing before what that degree was supposed to be?
Well, as I got closer to the end of my degree, it became clear that I had to specialize in something. And I don't like to specialize. I don't like to narrow my vision. And while I was working on the degree, this was in the San Francisco Bay Area, right during the dot-com boom of the late 80s and early 90s. And there was just an amazing amount of really interesting stuff going on. And I frankly didn't want to miss out on that. The other problem, of course, was that there were basically no jobs. So that sort of forced the issue. But instead of trying to batter my way into some kind of academic position, I decided to walk away and see what happened. And what happened was that the skills that I acquired in working on my doctorate, and a lot of that I had to do when I wasn't actually enrolled. See, my wife and I were both working on doctorates at the same time. And so the way we did it is I would work for a year and she would go to school, and the next year she would work and I would go to school. And when I wasn't at school, I still had to keep up in my field, so I had to get creative about how I did research and found out what was going on. So I used those tools to try to get into some other things. And it started with technical writing, and by a very strange collection of circumstances, it also led me to co-found a university for intelligence, counterterrorism, and executive protection personnel. It led me to a lot of work in science education and science, promoting science literacy. And as you mentioned, I even found myself working on a project to create what was essentially an amateur space program. We were looking to be the first group to launch a rocket that would go actually into outer space. Now, that didn't actually happen, but I sure learned a lot, and I had a lot of fun.
That was really amazing. The fact that having in that particular degree, you were not looking forward to more like or narrow it down to a specific field. The fact that you just love exploration, and the fact that you could do the whole of different couples of things at a very larger space. Also, what identity have you built around becoming an academic? And what did releasing it feel like?
Well, I felt a little bit like a fish out of water. At first, first of all, my degree is pretty strange to begin with. It's in ancient Near Eastern studies, which I had to keep explaining to everybody what that was. Fortunately, the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, and, with Harrison Ford running around the Middle East trying to find antiquities. And for some reason, I didn't have to explain myself after that.
Yeah.
Oh, like Indiana Jones. Yeah, like Indiana Jones, So, so that was helpful. But the other thing too was that now for some of this too, you have to go back. While I was in school, this was around 1990 or 91, one dark night I was mugged in a bad part of town. And I realized that my otherwise excellent education hadn't prepared me for that. And so I started looking around for a place where I could learn to protect myself. And Eventually, I found this place called the International Institute for Professional Executive Protection that trained high-end level bodyguards, and it was run out of a warehouse in San Jose. And so I signed up there, and the guy was teaching this martial art that no one had ever heard of called Muay Thai. And so I studied that for a while, and after about a year of this, the guy running the school, we were taking a break, and I let slip that I had an advanced degree from Berkeley. And he perks up and he says, "Can I see you in my office?" And I said, "Okay, what have I done?" We get in there, he sits me down, and he says, "Now I've got this little school here, and to expand it, I want to make it bigger. I want to turn it from just a little school into an actual university with bachelor's and master's and doctoral programs. And I want to expand from executive protection into intelligence and counterterrorism. But I need people with advanced degrees to help me." He was an Indian national. He's an American citizen now. But at the time, he says, "Look, I've got a business degree from a university in India that no one's ever heard of. I can't, I don't have the credentials to do this." And he says, "And you're a technical writer, so you know how to document things, and we need people to document things." And then he leans across the table and he looks me in the eye and he says, "How would you like to co-found a university with me?" And I was blown away, I was completely shocked by this. And I said, "That sounds wonderful, but there's just one problem. I don't know that world. I don't know intelligence or counterterrorism or that sort of thing. I went to school learning to read, ancient parchment and clay tablets. I don't know this world." And his answer was very interesting. He said, "You've been coming to the school for about a year. You keep coming. You keep showing up, you train hard, you listen, you pay attention, and you are learning what I'm teaching you. I think you can do this."
Ooh.
And that was that was not the answer I expected. But it turned out he was right. We brought in a bunch of people from a number of agencies, government, military, and my job was to take their expertise and turn that into course material and degree programs and so forth. And eventually we were successful. We founded what became Henley Putnam University, with a faculty of about 100 people on the faculty. Later, the school merged with National American University, so it's now the Henley Putnam School of Strategic Security at National American. What we did was something no one had done before. Up to that point, there were no accredited degree programs in those fields, so we were breaking new ground. And maybe that was an advantage because there wasn't a fixed procedure for how to do a degree program in intelligence, so we had a little bit of freedom that way. But that was an important lesson for me. It taught me that passion will take you a long way, and thinking carefully will take you a long way, and having the right people on your side will make all the difference.
Yeah, it will take you a long way. Thinking will take you a long way. But having people, by your side will actually make a whole lot of difference. That was really a whole lot. So when did you realize that the approach you had developed out of necessity was actually a philosophy worth the share?
Well, the need to change course became clear to me about the time I filed my dissertation. I mean, even before I graduated, it was clear that the path that I thought was going to work, A, it wasn't going to work, and B, it just didn't interest me anymore. The last thing I wanted to do was spend a career doing something I didn't like. That's one of my rules, is that if I can possibly avoid it, don't take any job that isn't interesting. Or if it isn't interesting, try to find a way to make it interesting, because otherwise I'll go nuts. The other thing, too, was that my spouse, she had kind of had a similar awakening. And what's ironic is her degree is in classics, so ancient Greek and Latin. But what she ended up doing was joining the faculty of the university that I co-founded.
Yeah.
And in fact, she still teaches for them. She teaches courses in global geopolitics and the history of intelligence, and sits on dissertation committees, and she very much enjoys it. And
Yeah.
No, it isn't exactly what she trained for, but she seems to be doing okay. She's very much a guerrilla scholar herself.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. I think it just speaks volumes to the fact that, yeah, don't take up any job you didn't like and be flexible and be willing to actually try out couples of options. Yeah, it's really amazing. So what was the moment the Guerrilla Scholarship framework clicked into something you knew others needed?
It happened, I would say, about 2 or 3 years after I graduated. I was working for a nonprofit organization called the Society for Amateur Scientists, and I had been talking with the guy who ran the organization, and we were talking about how amateurs did things that professionals didn't or couldn't or wouldn't do, and how it took a different approach. And I realized that this was an approach that I had been taking my whole life, or at least for a large chunk of it. But what really turned it was a conference that we held in Philadelphia. This would have been I think, in 2001. And I had come up with the phrase guerrilla scholarship actually quite some time ago, because it seemed like a good way to describe just the way I operated. And I gave a paper called Secrets of Guerrilla Scholarship, and it was about alternative ways of finding information, about obtaining a title if you needed one, like to get into a conference, and various sorts of things like that. The idea was, no, you're not associated with a university, but you can still enjoy some of the things that they do. And after I gave the paper, a number of people came up to me and said, wow, that was really interesting. In fact, one guy, a literary agent, came up and said, that's a book. You should write a book about that.
Yeah.
Well, that book took 25 years to write, mostly because I kind of had to do it when I had time to do it. And most of the time that was when I was unemployed. And so I would take time and work on the book. But eventually it did get done and was published last year in June. And it's available now through Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Thrift Books and a number of other places. And it's available in hardcover, softcover, ebook, and audio. But yeah, that was sort of what changed it, was that one conference. And I kept hearing from people saying, you need to write this down. You need to come up with a way to help other people do what you do. And here I am.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. It's really lovely. During those periods, who in your life understood what you were doing and who taught you wasting your potential?
So what was I doing in the meantime?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Pretty much whatever I could find. I ran a small nonprofit of my own for a while. It was a science education nonprofit. I did some of that. I did freelance writing. I did yard work. I worked as a driver, worked briefly as a rare book appraiser. I did some consulting for the university that I had helped found. I actually got laid off from that after the stock market crash of 2008. So I got laid off from my own university. It was kind of depressing.
Yeah.
I did some tutoring. I also did a little working as a musician, just whatever I could find. And that made for some scary moments. I also did a little bit of teaching as an adjunct instructor at Stanford University. I taught a course on Introduction to the Old Testament and also some stuff on New Testament and early Christianity. That was actually quite well received. I was pleased by that. Unfortunately, Stanford didn't pay its adjunct instructors very well. Some of my fellow instructors were literally living in their cars.
Oh.
It's like, do you have office hours? Yes, I'm in the red Toyota parked across from the Taco Bell. I mean, it really was that bad. I don't know if it's still that bad, but in a place as expensive as California, it's not going to work. So yeah, and then I did manage to eventually get a very nice job with Citigroup, where I worked in their cybersecurity section. I was actually a former faculty member from my university helped me get that job, and that actually gave me enough stability that I could finish the book.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. So looking back, is there anything about the traditional academic paths you wish you would have fought harder to stay in, or living always is right?
You know, every job interview I've ever been in, someone asks me, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah,
And I finally said, are you kidding me? I can never predict what's going to happen in 5 years. That's ridiculous. Give me another question.
yeah,
Do I have regrets? You know, I do. Sometimes I wish that I had been in a position where I could explore my given field a little more deeply. You know, there's only so much you can do on the outside. I miss having regular colleagues who are as familiar with my subject as I am. And I miss that. I also missed having some stability. You know, I have friends that I went to high school with who are now retiring after 20, 30 years doing something. And I think to myself, boy, it must have been nice not to have to worry about job hunting,
yeah,
for all that time. But at the same time, when I look through my journals, I look through my diaries, I realize that it was during those periods of unemployment, for some strange reason, those were some of my most productive years in terms of my own intellectual development or the projects that I undertook. So I'm actually kind of irritated by that. But there it is. It's on paper. I can't say it didn't happen.
yeah. Amazing, amazing, amazing. So you write about communal learning as a way of strengthening society. What did you have to quit before the lone intellectual idea, or before you could embrace that?
I had to quit the idea that the university was the only game in town. And that didn't come to me right away. It took me a while, but I began to realize, first of all, that most of the really innovative thinking in the world is not happening at the universities. The real groundbreaking stuff is happening outside of that. The other thing that I didn't realize until I started digging in historically is that there have been some really interesting learning organizations that have been created that have done some remarkable things. I'm thinking, for instance, of the Paris salons, where people like Hemingway and these avant-garde artists and authors, Picasso and so on, all got together and they talked about the big ideas and they figured out what they were going. They basically defined the artistic flavor of the West for the next generation. I learned about the African American pre-Civil War literary societies where African Americans would get together and they would teach each other and have debates and discussions. And that's where a lot of the abolitionist thinking in the United States got thrashed out and defined.
Yeah.
Another for me really inspiring was the way Allied prisoners of war in World War II set up their own universities in the prison camps in Germany and Eastern Europe. And they reached a point where they had set up arrangements with universities back in Britain so that these prisoners who had been studying could actually sit for their exams while they were still POWs. And when they got home, they had a diploma waiting for them.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to work your way around not just a lack of resources, but active opposition to learning. That has been the real eye-opener for me.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize just what was possible when I started this, but now I have a better idea.
Yeah. Amazing. I think it's really lovely, especially when you make it. After we take it the long way. Thinking we take it the long way. Yeah. Working with people make the difference. Yeah, it's really amazing, especially the fact that sometimes I think life is more fluid with flavor when you go through the ups and downs and seeing different perspective, and you know what is possible now, you know what is not, and a whole lot of different perspective compared to the stability that comes with doing one thing or true. Sometimes it look boring for some persons, so it's lovely, and every one of them comes with their own demands, and I think just figuring it out, going the highs and the lows sometimes could really, really be rewarding and filled with a whole lot of lovely moments.
True.
Yeah. So lastly, for someone listening, I hope fit trap between the credentials that they have and the life they actually want, what is the first thing they need to quit today?
I think the first thing they need to quit is the idea that they can't, that they don't have the talent or the ability to do something extraordinary. You can. Everybody has some superpower, as they say. You just have to find it. And the second thing that you have to quit is that all mistakes are bad. You can, learning from your mistakes, we talk about it, but in school, we don't really teach people how to learn from their mistakes. I had a martial arts teacher once who used to say, there's a right way and a wrong way to fail. And the right way, of course, is to be able to sit back and go, okay, I understand now why that didn't work. Let me try another way. In fact, there was an article a number of years ago in the Harvard Business Review, and it was called On the Wisdom of Deliberate Mistakes. And what it said was sometimes you do something that you know ought to be a mistake, but sometimes in doing that, you discover that there are perspectives or angles to things that you didn't know were there. Or another thing, too, is that making a deliberate mistake can challenge the received wisdom, and maybe you'll find out that conventional wisdom isn't so great.
Yeah. So true. Amazing, amazing. Thank you for the lot of you said. Yeah, it's really amazing. So we should actually treat mistake as data to know more to what we could do better the next time. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. I also share the whole my audience would love to connect with you, especially for your book and to reach out, and especially if they have anything to actually more like make reference or after reading your book. How can they reach out and where's the best platform?
Probably the best way to reach out to me would be through my Substack, which is called The Guerrilla Scholar. And I'm also on Blue Sky and Facebook. Also look up Guerrilla Scholar and you'll find it. And let's see, I'm also on LinkedIn under my real name, Sheldon Greaves, which I check that frequently. But the Substack is probably the best way to go. I don't have a large social media footprint. I just don't have time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alshedo. Yeah, definitely the link is going to be on the show notes for my audience is really connect with you. Yeah, your story is a reminder that the most powerful education is often the one you design yourself, and that quitting the prescribed paths can be the beginning of your most original work. Yeah, find the Guerrilla Scholar Handbook, and definitely the link is going to be on the show notes. Once again, it's really a pleasure and honor to have you on the show, Shadow.
Thank you, Benaiah. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much.